So if you're a Notre Dame fan, kind of the big news of the day is that Notre Dame finally released, I shouldn't say finally, Notre Dame released their depth chart. Couple of interesting, notable things on the depth chart, at least from my perspective. The number one thing that as soon as I looked at Notre Dame's depth chart, and again, if you just go over to social media, you'll find it. The Irish did not list Tobias Merriweather as a receiver on the 2 deep on the depth chart. At one receiver, they've got Lorenzo Styles, a sophomore, a true sophomore that is from the Columbus area, Pickerington, and is going to, be basically Notre Dame's number one guy, I think, for the most part. They listed Jaden Thomas, who's a true freshman. Incorrect. Who's a sophomore, as a guy that is going to start. It'll be interesting to see if he's in the slot or if he's outside a little bit more. Notre Dame doesn't specify that on their depth chart necessarily, along with Braden Lindsey, with guys like Joe Wilkins, with guys like Matt Salerno, with guys like Deion Colsey right behind them. Deion Colsey and Joe Wilkins have some injury things that they're going to have to. We're going to see how well they can play on the big stage against Ohio State. Both have been banged up through fall camp, but listed on the 2 deep, which is why, honestly, I think that true freshman Tobias Merriweather not being there is kind of a big deal. It's interesting that a guy that has made flashes, at least if you listen to the top guys that cover Notre Dame, isn't listed even on the 2 deep. Now, that said, the 2 deep is only that. It's just a 2 deep. And, you could have gone ahead and you could have said, maybe Tobias Merriweather is kind of right in that spot where Deion Colsey is. And since Colsey is a sophomore, he got the nod there. And, I've heard some people saying that at the end of the day, it'll be interesting. They doubt that Tobias Merriweather gets fewer snaps than Deion Colsey, which is an interesting take on the situation. Another interesting thing for Notre Dame is the tight end position. They list Michael Mayer as the starter. That's a given. I mean, guy's been starting since he was a true freshman and is one of the top tight ends in the country, if not the best tight end in the country. Junior Kevin Bauman, who is a guy that has flashed at different times. Haven't heard a ton about him this year in camp. Good or bad, to be honest with you, is listed as the second string guy, with Davis Sherwood as the guy that kind of brings up ends that is the third guy listed there, which is interesting to me because Eli Raridan, freshman, and Holden Stays, a freshman, are 2 guys that we've heard a lot of big things about in camp, and in terms of how far along they are as true freshmen in their ability to make plays. And given Notre Dame's receiving deficiencies, I guess you could say, or a lack of depth in the receiving room, it's interesting to see that those guys, neither of those 2 freshmen are listed there. Now, here's what I'll say, I guess, about the Notre Dame offensive depth chart, I guess, is that, I guess they list this depth chart, but situationally, this depth chart doesn't necessarily tell a whole awful lot about, what that means for when Notre Dame gets in situational football, like the red zone, I guess you could kind of say, or, in passing downs. I would certainly expect to see Eli Raridan or Holden Stays in there before I'd ever see Davis Sherwood, for instance, maybe even Kevin Bauman. Okay. Especially if you're going to move Michael Mayer out to the slot and put another kind of more real tight end in there, for blocking purposes, for a release valve or whatever. And you want Michael Mayer to get out in passing patterns. You would think that in certain instances, you'd see some of those younger guys at that particular position, but, I don't know. We'll see.